Great to be here to chair this first panel in our leadership conference on generational leadership this morning. And the title of this panel is Strategy and Action. When Chip and Weinglass introduced me as a professor and member of the Stockdale Center for Ethical Leadership, but of course I get teased a good bit about my name. And you might have wondered whether that guy was going to be here. I'm sorry to disappoint you. People do sometimes say that I resemble him, and they get a little bit confused. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? Well, gosh, you both have gray hair and a beard, and you're old and short and fat, dumpy. And I interrupt that stream of compliments to say, yeah, but he's rich and talented. Can we move on? So let's move on now from that to this panel this morning, which is about generational leadership, about some of the conflicts between us baby boomers and a lot of millennials that I see out there today, and how does that affect how we work together in our jobs, in school, in the military, and so forth. We have a very distinguished panel this morning. My plan is to set a context and pose a broad question for them, and then to introduce them each in turn to allow them to speak on the question and on the theme of this discussion for about 5 minutes. And that will leave us about half of our hour together at the very end for questions and answers for you, members of the audience, to pose questions to individuals on the panel or to the panel as a whole, and we'll have a good discussion for the rest of the hour and wind up at about 11:45, 11:50, in time for you to go over and have chow and get home. Okay, so what is the context? Well, even though I may be gray-haired, bearded, old, short, fat, and dumpy, I do remember my own experience coming into the workplace when I was a bit younger. In fact, it was over in Washington in the old post office. Very impressive place on Pennsylvania Avenue. I've been teaching for a long time, and this was my first real workplace experience. And I go into the job and come home, and my wife says, how does it go? And I say, well, you know, this is 1990, but this workplace that I'm in might as well have been clipped out of 1950. People are sitting in dark, dank, dungeness rooms and little cubicles. There are telephones on everybody's desk where the boss presses an intercom like they do with Mad Men, and you know, buzz, and you jump through the ceiling and go rushing off to see what the boss wants. And people didn't have computers, they didn't even have computer terminals, they had typewriters, and they were busy typing little memoranda on little pieces of yellow paper and running around and stuffing in the mailboxes, and other people were running around going to the mailbox to see if anybody had stuffed anything in that they were supposed to act on. Everybody rushing around, all this noise and chaos, and nothing really getting done. It was just a big waste of time. Well, this was the beginning, of course. The World Wide Web hadn't really gotten underway, but we had a good 20 years of computers, and certainly there was no reason not for everybody to have a personal computer on their desk and use email and start getting efficient that way. So I took it upon myself to say, well, I'm going to just take this in hand. This is too wasteful in office space. We're going to get organized and get with the 21st century and get going. So I presented my plan to all my new cohorts for collaborators and colleagues. We're going to have computers on every desk. We're going to use email instead of a memorandum form to get rid of these typewriters and so forth and so on. And they listened politely, and then they basically told me to take a hike. That I was young and brash, believe it or not, young and brash and arrogant. And I didn't know what I was talking about, and they had their ways of doing business. And I see this book that we've been studying here in preparation for our leadership conference by Stanton Smith, Decoding Generational Differences, that one of those big chapters in there is the Great Technological Divide. And this is what I was unknowingly encountering at that time. But the issue was, how do the younger people with their new ideas on technology or anything else come into a workplace with goals and strategies and plans and hopes and aspirations and dreams, and then encounter often the resistance that comes both from jealousy and ignorance, from stubbornness and tradition, but also maybe in a way that we can't quite figure out from wisdom and experience. You know, which is which? How does it all work? And how do our goals and plans and aspirations as younger people, as we come into the workplace, survive that first encounter. How do we lead our bosses? How do we lead across generational differences and divides, and every great technological divide? So my question to our panelists this morning was, well, think back. For some of them, they're pretty young. They don't have to think very far. What strategic goals did you have when you first entered your own workplace environment? What did you hope to accomplish? And how have those expectations evolved subsequently? How did they survive that first encounter with the workplace, particularly in response to generational issues? How did you deal with those supervisors with their prevailing leadership philosophies that may have frustrated and challenged you? So that's my big question in context, and I'm going to turn now to our panelists who will address this each in turn. I'd like to begin this morning with Mr. Hart Cunningham. Mr. Cunningham launched his first global company at the age of 24, so he knows what it's like to take on big challenges at a fairly young age. His firms have been featured in over 75 newspapers, including the Harvard Independent, Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the San Diego Union Tribune. He's the author of a book, Maximizing Me, 30 Lessons on the Journey to Self-Empowerment, which gives insight into the dynamic learning process to self-empowerment. He was an Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year finalist for 2 consecutive years, and currently he's a consultant on leadership and motivation, and is a motivational speaker for multiple executive MBA university classes around the country. It's our privilege to begin this morning with Mr. Hart Cunningham.
How's everybody doing today? My name's Hart Cunningham. I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak about generational leadership. So when I kind of think about generational leadership, I got to think there's basically 2 parts. One is how would somebody that's 55, 60, 65 years old lead a team, a staff, and then the second part would be, how does a person that's 21, 22 about to enter the workforce, or basically going to politics and the military or so forth, basically how do they establish the credibility that's needed to basically differentiate themselves from somebody who's already, basically proven themselves, they've already had the credibility, the experience, or so forth. So. And then first of all, you guys are here, and I think it's important you guys kind of learn about, who the speakers are just real briefly, so you can kind of see, what there is to learn, from. So my quick background is I started my first internet company when I was 21 years old. I've started over 80 different companies in the last 12 years. I work with private equity and venture capital firms on a daily basis, and it's very different from, kind of the other panelists and basically, people with a lot more experience that have been out there 20, 30 years. We don't do business plans. We start companies literally in 2-3 weeks. So, there'll be a firm that has, a couple $1 billion and say, hey, we need to basically allocate $20, $30 million. We need to create a company that does X, Y, and Z, whether it's a social platform, whether it's a tweet or copycat, whether it's some type of a manufacturing company. And so a lot of times I advise them on it, or sometimes I'll create it from scratch, and we have a team in California, we have a team in Arizona, we have about 80 employees there, we have offices in India, Philippines, South Africa, the UK, and so forth. So we do things very, very quickly, and the difference in kind of our generation, or at least what I do, is that every single team member is like technology whiz. I mean, it's just, everything you just do, it revolves everything around technology. So I think the thing that when we hire, people that are a little bit older, they want to put together their business plans, and they want to basically be able to plan everything out. Where you're going to be in 3, 6, 9, 18 months down the road. I think, how business is done nowadays, and I think how you're basically be able to see other aspects of the private and public sector is, you don't know the challenges, you don't know the problems that you'll basically encounter until you actually start moving into it. So the goal is to basically move to, as quickly as possible, be able to get to a product, be able to get into a marketplace. And so we almost kind of call it, everybody has kind of a first mover advantage. We almost also have a second mover advantage, right? So we'll look at a product, we'll look at something that's already out there, and we'll kind of copy some of the things that's working, look at things that aren't working, change it around. And so, basically when I'm talking about generational leadership, the most important thing is obviously being able to take what you know and what you have the ability to do as a young leader, which is you have technology, you have your creativity, you have your motivation, and basically be able to offset your lack of experience. And so the biggest thing is being able to really realize what what your limitations are. You're not going to have the type of experience that someone that's been out there for 30, 40 years has. So what you need to be able to do is do whatever you can to get your team, your staff, to be as productive as possible. So one of the things that our team does is we don't really have titles. We don't have a vice president, we don't have a president. It's you look at what every single person has, what their skill set is, what they're positive, and you also realize what their negatives are. So as a leader, the main thing you need to do is get your unit, get your staff to be as productive as possible, and be able to get some type of service, product, whatever you're trying to get accomplished in the quickest, most efficient possible way. And so I only have a couple minutes, so I think I kind of covered the basics of what we do for a living and how we basically attack situations. And so
Great.
maybe less than Q&A.
We'll go ahead and work our way down the panel, and
Yeah,
we'll do
definitely.
that afterwards. Good. Thank you, Hart. Thanks very much. I have two very nice-looking young men sitting next to me here, reminding me how old I am. The one at the far end of the table, I'm pleased and honored to say, is my colleague in the Department of Leadership, Ethics, and Law on the second deck of Luce Hall, Lieutenant Dave Schopler of the United States Navy. Lieutenant Schopler earned his bachelor of science degree at from Brown University and initially went off to work in the Peace Corps. In 1999, he entered Officer Candidate School and was commissioned in the United States Navy and subsequently trained with our Navy Special Services, Special Forces, and became a SEAL. Lieutenant Schopler served at SEAL Team 1 through 2003 in the Naval Special Warfare Unit 1 in Guam until September of 2004, and on SEAL Team 2 until joining us here. He's also served in the Philippines, Iraq, and Afghanistan. He's currently an instructor of Navy leadership and our SEAL liaison coordinator here in the Department of Leadership, Ethics, and Law at the U.S. Naval Academy. My privilege to introduce Lieutenant Schopler.
Thank you. So as Dr. Lucas said, I've been in the Navy about 9 years. I'll try and give you a framework for what my workplace environment is for those not familiar with the Naval Special Warfare or the military. Basically, a SEAL team is led by about an 18-year veteran in the Navy. A commander has a lot of experience. He has kind of a right-hand man that often has 20 or more years experience in the Navy SEALs, in my case. Then you have successive departments within that team that are led by younger members, lower ranking members, down to sort of the core group, which is called a platoon. And that's led by a junior officer like myself. I just finished a job as a platoon commander this past April. So you have a range of ages. You have 18, 19-year-old guys just out of training, just out of boot camp and through our training pipeline out in Coronado, to men in their 40s that have been in the SEAL teams for many years and might be ready to retire. So crosses several generations. When I entered as a junior officer, you kind of work your way through the ranks of a platoon till eventually you become the platoon commander. So I dealt with the youngest members coming into training, as well as dealing with your superior officers that are a little bit older, a lot more experienced, and dealing with sort of the differences between the groups. I would say for the most part, my experiences growing up in that community and then leading some of the men is that there are a lot of values and characteristics that transcend generations. Good leadership is good leadership. People that have good values, are strong, decisive, good communicators. That spans the generations. What I saw, maybe where there was a clash, I'm not sure if it's generational or positional, and that'll be probably something good to take back to your panels to discuss. But as a junior officer, my age, growing up with the technology we have these days, I think we want a lot of instantaneous feedback these days that other generations didn't grow up with. They're not accustomed to, so there is a lot of information overload for people. They're not, you know, the kids today, you know, they're texting while they're typing, while they're watching TV and on the computer. They're used to these, doing all these tasks. They're used to instantaneous feedback. I'm sure you guys are, some of you are texting right now as we're talking. But you're also paying attention, I hope. So what I saw was commanders that suddenly had all this information at their fingertips that they previously didn't have. Some of them were not sure what to do with it. A case in point would be during our operations, the technology is advanced to the point where the commander back at the base can watch, you know, in real time, live video feed what's going on during a mission. So you have a general or a colonel, someone very high ranking, you know, with a lot of experience, watching what you know, a small group is doing out on the battlefield. And that will inevitably lead to the commander asking questions, asking, you know, people working for him what's going on, and that filters down to the people on the battlefield getting a call, because, you know, we have the technology now for instantaneous communications. You get on a phone, whatever, and you can answer questions. Unfortunately, you don't really want to be answering questions during a lot of the operations, yet they'll come in anyway. So I found as a junior officer, it was sometimes frustrating, the demand for information from higher you know, authorities during certain parts of missions and operations. And sometimes I felt like they didn't trust people to get the job done. You know, they would give you a lot of you know, authority to do things, but it would require a lot of information, a lot of proof that you were doing things the right way. And I know I remember writing my commander with a bit of frustration. You know, is it me, my generation? I want, you know, instantaneous responsibility. I want instantaneous change. That might be it. I'm not sure, but I did write him in frustration, saying, "Hey, why do you need this information? I'm telling you, what we're doing is the right thing. I know the area. You know, trust me that you've trained me correctly, and that, you know, I'll get the job done." So that was kind of my perspective as a junior member in the military, kind of growing up with the explosion in technology, instantaneous information, and sort of information overload.
Thanks, Dave. Speaking of colonels and generals, we also have admirals and congressmen with us today. And, you know, Annapolis, despite its own storied history, is really, to its frustration, often little more than an extension, almost a bedroom community of Washington, D.C. So we do things Washington style. And usually that means paying attention to protocol. And in protocol, your congressmen go first, and then your senior military officers, your flag officers, and then you work your way down the chain of command to see if there's any time left. Congressman Russo heard that this morning, and he said, well, you know, phooey on that. They don't, you young folks don't want to hear us old knuckle-dragging Neanderthals. Let's let these young folks have their say first and speak directly as members of your generation to you, and then we'll work our way up the chain of command, as it were, the generational chain, and we'll hear from Admiral Miller and then from Congressman Russo. And so, yeah, one thing you do learn from experience over time is when congressmen and admirals give you advice, it's not a bad idea to take it if you want to, you know, hang on to your budget or your command or your job. So we're doing it, we're going that way, inverse protocol order. And in that inverse order, it's now my privilege to introduce Rear Admiral Michael Miller. Admiral Miller is one of our graduates here from the Naval Academy. He graduated in 1974, and he spent his career as a pilot, a Navy pilot, flying the S-3AB Viking and commanding carrier groups. He currently serves as the Navy's Chief of Legislative Affairs, but his previous assignments included Deputy Chief of Staff for Global Force Management and Joint Operations, U.S. Fleet Forces Command, Commander of the USS Ronald Reagan Strike Group back in 2005. He's also been Deputy Assistant to the President and the first ever active duty Director of the White House Military Office, and also Commanding Officer of the John F. Kennedy, the Coronado, and the VS-24. Our privilege to have with us one of our own graduates, Rear Admiral Mike Miller.
Thank you, Dr. Lucas, and my thanks to the class of '38, and especially to Mitch and Linda Hart of the Hart Foundation for their generous sponsorship of this conference. As Dr. Lucas had suggested, we talk a little bit about the framework that we encountered as we first got into the workplace. And so I guess I should probably explain my bona fides in that I'm a baby boomer. And when I first entered the workplace, that was as a pilot in a fleet jet squadron flying off the mighty Saratoga. We were nearing the end of the Vietnam War, and conscription had just been abolished in 1973. Most forms of conscription, that is, because at that time there were still judges who would deal with some young troublemakers by offering them the option of jail time or military service. We were experiencing the aftermath of the social upheaval of the 60s, including race riots on 2 of our aircraft carriers and sabotage on 2 others. Amongst several findings, a congressional investigation of the carrier troubles reported that insufficient emphasis had been given to formal leadership training, particularly in the ranks of petty officers and junior officers. Our Navy was then and is today a reflection of American society. Our service members had beards, unruly hair, and probably more closely resembled the sailors of the 1800s than most would be willing to admit. We had a 3 strikes rule for drug abuse, no physical readiness standards, and a generally undereducated enlisted force who were products of a schooling process firmly rooted in spare the rod, spoil the child. I remember a very large chief petty officer, that's a senior enlisted member in the Navy, in that first squadron who routinely was turned to when the various divisions came across a young recruit who simply refused to follow the rules. When not forward deployed, our command operated out of an old hangar down at NAS Cecil Field in Jacksonville, and behind that hangar was a locker in which we stored paint. It was a secluded spot, and when this particular CPO invited a young recalcitrant to visit him out behind the paint locker, it generally meant that respect for authority was about to be explained through the toe of his boot. So in short, my initial strategic goals as a young leader were mostly focused on survival. But as society changed, so too did the nature and the face of our workforce. The all-volunteer military meant that we as leaders needed to find better ways of encouraging our people to want to come back to work the next day, the same challenges that our civilian counterparts face. Without the threat of a draft, and with the enforcement of higher standards, we needed to find highly skilled and, most importantly, motivated young men and women to fill the ranks. Despite the many challenges of leading baby boomers, there was still a carryover for us from our parents that held that service, in its many and varied forms, was honorable and something worthwhile, and that helped carry the leaders of the 70s. But the self-awareness of the workforce that followed, that being Generation X, meant a different approach to motivating people who were joining our Navy. Gone were the days of, just do it because I said so. Equally irrelevant was the concept of, if I want your opinion, I'll ask for it. It was certainly a challenge because up to that time, leadership was not very interested in internal communication strategies, or even less in competencies associated with listening. We had no formal counseling process aside from one yearly fitness report, or less formally the paint locker, and while many of us learned a great deal from our seniors, mentorship was not universally accepted as a requirement for positions of leadership. But all that changed as a new generation arrived in our organizations. Gen Xers weren't willing to wait around for a decision to be made. Much like a quote attributed to Mahatma Gandhi, "There go my people, I must hurry and catch up with them, for I am their leader." For some, this questioning attitude of virtually everything was disquieting. It meant more one-on-one time with our sailors, and initially, a lot more work to get the mission done. It meant transitioning from a posted paper schedule to Post-its with daily reminders, far from the emails of today. It meant teams and committees, ombudsmen and semi-official bodies to help inform the leader's judgment and decisions. And it led to organizations that were more homogeneous, more flexible, more adaptable in what at that time seemed to be a rapidly changing world. But of course that pace of change was nothing compared to what our newest generation, the millennials, have come to accept just as business as usual. is no small challenge for any of us to provide leadership to the group assembled here today. A generation who has grown up with the internet and DSL as commonplace, and who have designed your own communication networks through these very same mediums. It's been said that the greatest challenge for transgenerational leadership in the age of the millennial is how to deal with a generation that will only accept yes as an answer. And I believe that to be true. Your presence here today speaks powerfully to your commitment to making a difference, to saying yes to laying out the foundations for leadership in an incredibly complex and uncertain world of tomorrow. All of the surveys indicate that you have far more in common with the G1, the greatest generation, than with either the baby boomers or Gen X. You're more committed to social reform, more willing to say yes to service in a wide variety of public service activities. You want to strengthen the political system, not tear it down. And an overwhelming majority of you support the initiative to build a U.S. Public Service Academy, a civilian counterpart to the campus where we sit. You challenge us with flex hours, paternity as well as maternity leave, even the fundamental definition of work. For those that are currently in positions of leadership, our challenge is speaking through the noise, or more importantly, being heard above the cacophony of modern communications networks. But despite our different perspectives over these generations, I would offer that we still share common virtues that leaders across the generations have found essential to be able to meet the challenges of their times. And I would list them simply as vision, courage, patience, compassion, honesty, and optimism. It's all about choice, choosing to participate and not be a bystander. As Robert Schuller once said, what would you do today if you knew you could not fail? Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Great. Our final speaker this morning, before we turn to our question and answer session, is the Honorable Martin A. Russo, who is CEO and Senior Vice Chairman of Cassidy and Associates. He received his undergraduate degree from DePaul University in Chicago in 1965 and his law degree from the same institution in 1967. In 1975, he was elected to the U.S. Congress, actually in 1974, and began serving in January 1975. He served there for 18 years in the U.S. House of Representatives from Illinois 3rd District in Chicago, his hometown. His tenure was distinguished by his involvement in a broad range of public policy issues facing America's businesses, including tax policy, federal budgets, health care, energy and environmental policy, transportation, crime, immigration, trade, telecommunications, and small business issues. It's pretty much the same list we're wrestling with now. And he's a very experienced guy in thinking about these questions, and will share that with us today. In 2008, this past year, DePaul University awarded him its Distinguished Alumnus Award. It's our privilege to have him here with us today, Congressman Russo.
I guess in my career, I have spanned a generation. When I got to Congress in 1974, by the way, I've had several different entrants into the workplace. I started out as a prosecutor, then went to Congress, and then left Congress, and now I'm in the private sector. But I'll touch on Congress because I don't have that much time to talk about the other part of my life, which if you're interested, just fire a question. And as I should tell my workshop people, I have an opinion on everything, just ask me, and I'll tell you whether you like it or not. I'll be more than happy to give it to you. But in 1974, I ran in a very, very Republican district that no Democrat has ever wanted and wasn't supposed to be. And Watergate came, and all of a sudden, a mass of young people got elected to Congress in 1974, third largest class. We had 75 Democrats and 18 Republicans. And so, as the fourth youngest member of that class, I was 30 years old when I was sworn in, you can see the difference. The Congress in those days was run by 8 to 10 people in the House and 8 to 10 people in the Senate. And all of them was young generations, just like all of you, who want to change the world in a second. And so we want to put all these reforms in. And what we did is we took the Congress from just 7 or 8 or 10 people running the show. We diffused the power among a lot of different members. Some say it was good, some say it was bad. I think the jury is still out on that. But in a sense, it gave all of us a voice. And I think when you deal with leadership, you want individuals to have a voice. You want them to have skin in the game, so they participate and do what's necessary. So here comes this brash class of 1974. We voted out 3 chairmen of committees, which was unheard of. We attacked the seniority system, and so we made changes. And of course, then I was no longer the 4th youngest member of the class. 2 years later, I was probably now the 16th youngest. The next thing you know, you're the 25th youngest, and all of a sudden you start saying, you know, seniority looks pretty damn good. You're long around here. And you know all those reforms? Wait a minute, I'm not so sure all those reforms really work. And the point is, even though we think it's great at the moment, we need to reflect a little bit more. And I think our class was sold a bill of goods early on because we're this new generation and we have to make changes. And what's interesting is, you need a majority of votes. And back in those days, it was 292 Democrats. Picture that one. So you need about 147 votes to win anything. And we're winning with 175, 180 votes. Well, where the heck was we were only 75 if all of us voted together. What was going on? And so it was the generation before us that thought it would be a good idea to change things because they were denied access and influence. And so I think in the long run, we probably did a good job. But I think sometimes we went a little too far. And now let's fast forward to 1995, the Republican Revolution, where they came to Congress, and what did they do? They went back to the old system. They went back to a system where only 5 or 6 made decisions about what's going on. Now, fast forward to 2006, the Democrats take over the House and the Senate, and now they put a hybrid in. You have very, very strong leadership who have a lot of influence. But in order to pass any legislation today, you have to have consensus. So even though the speaker comes from a very liberal district in San Francisco, she doesn't govern from the left. She governs from the middle. So they actually learned the lesson of pre-1974, post-1974, post-Republican Revolution. And now we're trying to run the Congress in a way that we try to make it bipartisan. Frankly, the system is not set up to be bipartisanship. Here's a big difference from that generation, my generation, to the generation of today. Money. Money is so important in running elections today that it clouds everything we do in government. Now, when I ran, I only had to beat my opponent. Today, when you run, you have to beat your opponent. You have to beat the Republican Congressional Campaign Committee. You have to beat 527s who are out there not coordinating their campaigns with the candidate, but blasting you every chance they get. You have to deal with the internet. You have to deal with bloggers. I mean, I don't know what some of these people were when I first heard about this stuff, so you can tell what in the Neanderthal I was. I've never run that campaign. I just had to worry about what my opponent said about me and how we debated and what we did against each other. Today, a political figure has to run against so many different obstacles, and money is required to deal with. And frankly, I'm a big advocate of public finance and election. I hope someday you all will think about that, so when you get a chance to influence your legislator or you become one yourself, think about it. The public pays for it in every way they do today, except they don't actually write the check. Somebody else writes the check, and of course, we're all being influenced by it. But that's the biggest difference I've seen. And the reason that Congress doesn't work and function as well is because it's more about power and money than it is about anything else. How do you stay in power? You have to raise a lot of money. How do you raise a lot of money? You have to go out and do all kinds of fundraising events. It takes away time from you to be a legislator. I'm sure my colleagues down there now would like some of the comments I make, but the truth of the matter is there's too much money. That's the major difference from that generation to your generation. And the other thing that's different today is all about power. My day was all about principle. How do we pass things, deal with 200 million people? Today it's 300 million people. And if there's ever a crisis, I know our economy is horrible. It's probably the worst shape it's been since the Great Depression. But we have a real crisis in government. And the fact that President Obama has reached out to young people like you is probably going to make the difference in saving what we go in the future. So at the a certain extent, the internet has its pluses. Instant communication has its pluses. It also has its minuses. And the minuses, we're too much in a hurry to get something done. You just need to slow down and figure it out. Unlike Hart here, who has to move quickly. I'm more of a traditionalist. There's a great book, I don't know if you read, I forget the author's name. That's part of being older. You do forget things. It happens. The Starfish and Spiders is a great book. Starfish is your generation when it's decentralized. You got to know it's Craigslist, it's email. I didn't know all these words until I read the book. Spiders are people like me, and we cut our heads off, things don't work so well. But the starfish keeps growing, and you're a starfish generation. So the starfish and the spiders have to figure out how to work together, because together we make one hell of a group. So thank you very much, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Congressman Russo. And we'll follow his advice and our new boss, our new president's advice, and reach out to you as well here today for your questions and your comments to our panelists as you think about your immediate future, the challenges you'll face, the goals, aspirations you have in your own career trajectory as you envision it. What kinds of questions would you like to put to the voices on our panel today? We have two kinds of voices speaking to one another across the years and the generations. The voices of youth, of energy, of innovation, of challenge and change, Lieutenant Schopler and Mr. Cunningham to my left, and the voices of seniority, experience, tradition, and authority and wisdom to my right, Admiral Miller and Congressman Russo. What questions would you put to them this morning? If you would, when you have your question, raise your hand. Let me recognize you. We'll have a microphone that we can pass to you so that we can all hear you and get you on our tape recorder here. You raise that question and address it to one or more of the members of the panel if you'd like to. Who will be first? Yes, ma'am. In the middle.
Now, some of you have been involved in more government-style leadership and more corporate-style leadership, but I think it's pretty common now that younger people in companies and in government are actually leading those in a generation older than them. How have you guys experienced that situation, or have you, and how have you handled it? What is the dynamic like?
Well, as part of the older generation, I don't have many young people who run my life. Basically, in the business I'm in now, most of the young people are learning from the experience of the senior lobbyists in our firm who've been there over 20 years. And obviously, one of the things we want to do is impart to them the knowledge we have and also learn from them, because there's a whole new technology out there that they're accustomed to that we're not, and they're bringing us into the modern generation while we try to explain to them how we can best utilize what they want to bring, but also the skills we have as a more senior person. So that's how I deal with it.
It's a very interesting question. I started my own company when I was 21. By the age of 24, I had 3 people that were triple my age, basically working for me. And so it's kind of interesting. None of them really knew how to use a computer. None of them knew to use the internet and so forth. But they were our best biz dev and salespeople. So they all had assistants. All the assistants did all the, all the different technology. They did all the, anytime they needed research or anytime they needed to communicate with any type of clients or so forth. But when you send a 24-year-old kid after $1 million account, they're not going to get it, right? Because our client's, CEO is 55 years old, and just older people can talk with older people. They get deals done, So it's just you have to realize that the credibility of someone that's younger, even though they're more technologically innovative and so forth, they don't have the experience. They don't have the things that they don't have that common. Just whatever it takes to get the business done. So I think it's very important for any type of culture, whether it's political or, nonprofit or for-profit, private, public sector, whatever it is, to basically be able to utilize each individual person for whatever their current skill set is. And I think it's very important for both sides to basically be able to improve upon what they're lacking. So if a person, is a little older, needs to realize, hey, this is something that I need to improve upon, and they need to embrace it and they need to learn it. And the younger generation, hopefully that credibility and the experience will come over time. So it's definitely an issue on a day-to-day basis.
If I could just add a little bit to that, I worked a little bit at the White House, and there's a generational transfer that goes on there as well as a new administration comes in. Not uncommon to have very young, energetic folks out of some remarkable backgrounds that would come in to leadership positions at a very, very young age. And I think there is initially a discomfort, probably somewhat because the younger folks recognize that the older people in the room, some of whom may be as old as their parents, are now subject to the determinations of whatever that younger person feels is the right direction to go. So it's largely initially something about ego and being able to check your ego at the door. But ultimately, I think there is a common respect amongst the generations, believe it or not, and I'm certain that we can find an example in just about every walk of life where there's friction there. But by and large, at least in my experience, the folks that bring new and innovative ideas, not just technology. I mean, I'm all for all the communications and the lightning speed that we have to get messages out. But I'm also most impressed by those people that learn early on the ability to move not just fast, like Hart says, but to be able to know when the right time is to make a decision. And that common respect, I think, is something that's earned. It takes time to build it, perhaps. And it's not instantaneous, but it is something that is critical for a successful organization of any walk of life to embrace.
The last thing I would say is the military sort of has a built-in system to facilitate cross-generational leadership. When you're just commissioned, you're right out of college or whatever unit, you're usually mentored or trained by a senior enlisted that probably has 10, 15 years in. So they become accustomed to working with younger people. You need to have an open mind about listening to what they say, and then, like all the panelists have said, combining that with your ideas, from your experiences, as a different generation. But as you rise, I think you can't forget those lessons you learned when someone older, someone more experienced was mentoring you and teaching you how to live in the Navy, Army, Marines.
Thank you. Yes, the microphones are on and the lines are open. Operators are standing by if there are questions. Let's see, down here and then right in the back there.
My question is, as millennials, I mean, we're no different than my father, my grandfather, as far as being younger and doing things, when we're teenage years and college years, of doing any sort of things, going out partying, having fun. Congressman, you brought it up as far as the differences that everything that we've done with millennials literally has been documented. People bought phones and take pictures and stuff, and some emails and whatnot. And I think they're starting to see it already, whereas millennials start to look to get into politics and whatnot, and people are using these pictures, using these emails, and things that people have done, and mudslingings. I've had friends who ran for different city council and whatnot, and their opponent was older, and so they just tarnished their name, took a few pictures from Facebook, and made them look like an alcoholic. And essentially, how do you think that as millennials we can kind of get over this challenge that as we look to get into maybe political service and whatnot? I mean, again, I'm no different than my father, grandfathers, as far as things they did when they were younger. The difference is that everything's been documented. How do we get over that kind of obstacle that would be kids more or less?
Well, let me tell you, from a political standpoint, it is a blessing and a curse. Because there's great advantages of using the internet and YouTube and Facebook. But at the same token, it makes it much more difficult to do the kind of things you think that are necessary, because the moment you say something, your opponent grabs it and puts it on Facebook or YouTube and characterizes you something totally different than what you meant. And a perfect example of that was the former senator from Virginia, George Allen. I mean, I don't particularly care for the comment he made, but the bottom line, it was blown so out of proportion that it actually cost him an election. Today, public officials need to have the confidence that they can say whatever they want and do what they want and make votes. But they're hamstrung because they're worried about what 30-second commercial can my opponent put on TV now. Because today it's 24/7 news. What are you going to do? When I was around, I heard Ted Turner. I was on a telecommunication subcommittee when I was in Congress, and Ted Turner came to see. He said, if they don't give me a damn network, I'm going to create 24/7 news. And I laughed at him. I said, you're joking. Who's going to pay attention to 24/7 news? You see. You know what? He was right. If people look at it, what does CNN say? What do headline news? I mean, it's a great thing to have, but it's also a major obstacle because it's at lightning speed, and basically you're trying to fill all the time you can possibly fill because news doesn't happen all the time for 24/7. And you can take something that somebody says and blow it way out of proportion. You look what happened to Caroline Kennedy. That one interview cost her the chance of being a U.S. Senator. And it was, the bloggers went crazy on it, like didn't her family teach her English? I mean, some of the stuff that says is pretty vicious. So I think it has its advantages, but I'm not a big comfort guy about that because I think from my perspective, I watch what the members of Congress do today. They're not as candid as they used to be. At my workshop, if I got into it with you, I just get into it with you. I say, you don't make much sense. So let's talk about it. Today, they'll take a picture of you, they'll film it and say, Russo, disrespectful to constituent, and all over the place. So I can't even be, so now what happens, you get these milk, oh, well, I'm sorry to hear that, and I wouldn't like you to, well, maybe we'll take a look at it and see what we do. You don't get my candid opinion. So I'm not in public office. I just give it to you, whether you like it or not, I'm just telling it to you. And so I see a big disadvantage. TV's great in Congress, to open it up, it just slows the process down. Members talk longer than they ever talked before. They do all things because they know it's being beamed back home. We don't get our job done fast enough. And we got a lot of issues we got to deal with. And to a certain extent, all this transparency creates a lot of problems in terms of meeting your goal. But you got to weigh the pluses and minuses. I've seen it when we didn't have TV. We got a hell of a lot more done in a shorter period of time because we weren't worried about people blasting us all over the newspapers. I don't think people have the freedom in public service to do what they really want to do today because they have to fend off so many things. The old days when Hubert Humphrey would get up there and say something, he didn't give a darn who quoted him. He just loved to be quoted. Today they're very careful what they say. And I think that's why you have a crisis in government. You're looking for fast answers, quick answers to massive problems. And so what we've been doing is bucking it to the next Congress, keep bucking it to the next Congress. Let them deal with it, let them face it. And what's happened? We haven't done our job. And you have a right to be ticked off about it. But part of the problem is what the member faces in terms of trying to do that and balancing out. George H.W. Bush made one of the toughest decisions a president could make in 1990. When he decided, and I was on the budget committee at the time, decided to make a decision to raise taxes in exchange for Democrats to cut spending. Cost him an election, but it was the right thing to do. And Ross Perot came out of the woodwork and beat him on that issue. And that was a horrible, and the beneficiary of George Bush's tax increases and spending cuts of 1990 was President Clinton, because by the end of his term, he was able to balance the budget. But without George Bush doing what he did in 1990, that would have never been accomplished. But nobody thanks George Bush for doing it. He just got defeated for doing the right thing. That's case in point.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, I mean, you're basically talking about when your private life becomes public, right? I mean, I'm from Arizona. Everybody knows my Leinart situation. He didn't. He had a beer bong with a couple of college girls, and the college girls posted the pictures on Facebook, and suddenly he's the backup quarterback, and now they're going to Super Bowl, right? So you see those situations all the time. And so a lot of times people on Facebook, they have 500 friends, right, and they're partying, they're having a good time or so forth. And, that image it'll easily be able to get out there through people's, Newsvine, whatever it is. But, I mean, you're in the Naval Academy. You spent 4 years getting your butt kicked, basically waking up at 5 a.m., working your tail off to be a future leader. You have more of a social responsibility. You have to have, a higher social standard because those images will always get out there. They'll always be used against you, So just any people that I know that are you know, that are, you know, very social and they're basically leaders or so forth, they either take one or two approaches. One is they'll never go in the public sector, and so they say, hey, I don't really care what people think about me, right? Or two is, hey, I eventually run for office and there's really no cameras around in my public life, you know, when I'm having a good time or so forth. But, you know, I'm a big believer in that, you know, anytime you're in a social scene and those people are basically working for you or you're their leader or so forth, I mean, you're almost kind of a different person, you know. You go home early before people, you know, go off and do bad stuff, right? People have, you know, 15 drinks, you have 1 beer, you know what I mean? So you just kind of have to, it's tough. It sucks that, you know, you have to basically have a different social standard or so forth, but it will come back and haunt you. I definitely know a lot of people that it has.
I'll just dogpile on that because I think it's a critical issue. The security of your communications, now that we have built these remarkable lightning fast communications links, the security of those communications, the security of your own private life, your lack of privacy, I would tell you is perhaps the greatest challenge of your generation, because you don't know what you're going to become. You don't know where you're going to go. But you can make decisions because of a party where somebody's got a beer bong, and the next thing you know, somebody has made a decision for you. They have painted you into a corner. That lack of privacy will ultimately, I mean, as you grow older, when all of that stuff never goes away in an internet that only gets bigger and you suddenly become a Wikipedia entry, at that time, you suddenly realize, geez, I really wish I hadn't had that 4th shot of tequila. Now, the congressman and I are from a generation where we didn't have to worry about that because most people were too drunk to be able to take those pictures.
And they didn't have anything to take them with.
That's exactly right. But I think Hart's advice is spot on. It is something you have to think about now. Because you have close friends and then you have some not so close friends, and that lack of privacy for those not so close friends can destroy what would be a budding career in many different fields. Because I will tell you now, you go to apply for employment, and I know many of you all not from the Naval Academy looking at other walks of life, they're gonna go to the internet and see if you're there. They will do that first. True for security clearances, true for virtually everything that is going to happen in your future. And once it's recorded, it's there. So I would offer that it is something for sober deliberation before you have that first drink. Thanks.
No comment. We had a question in the back. Yes. Here we
Great
go.
answer, Admiral. They don't understand it.
I was intrigued by the spider and the starfish comment. I was just wondering if you could each give like a couple of words of what do you think is key to have those people work together in an environment.
Well, it's kind of interesting. When you read the book, you'll find out that starfish are decentralized operations like Craigslist. He just throws it out there. You do whatever you want on it. You can list anything you want to list. Emu, they just put out whatever songs they want to put out. The ones that really make it is something like eBay. They figured out that by rating the person who is a purchaser or a seller, the higher the rating, the more people will sell on eBay. So eBay has a centralized operation. They have a CEO, they have a president, and they make money. Most starfish don't make money. They just do it, for example, Wikipedia, the old days when they created the Apache, the software. Apache was being developed by people at University of Illinois. These engineers were putting it all together, and all of a sudden they disbanded them. So who the heck was going to figure out whether the software worked out? All of a sudden, engineers around the country, nobody knew who they were sending things in the internet. Here's how to make Apache better. Download this, download that. It's totally decentralized. People do themselves. Wikipedia, people put out what they may think of Marty Russo, and somebody may edit it the next day. That's a starfish. eBay figured out how to do all that, be decentralized in terms of what you list, but be a spider in terms of how you make money. And so it can work. It does work. There are organizations that are combos and they make it. My generation has a hard time absorbing a starfish. We're just not this decentralized. We don't just toss things out there. We like order. And the Admiral and I are order kind of people. But there are people out there and coming in that are going to be making the generation switch over. And by the time you're my age, you'll be people looking at you. You'll be the Wikipedia people say, what's Wikipedia? We have this whole new thing over here called XYZ. And so the things that look strange to us today will look strange to you down the line. It has a lot of advantages, but I think the Admiral and Hart have really crystallized the biggest problem that people face. If you Google Marty Russo, you read a lot of good things and bad things about it. I don't agree with any of the bad things that they write about. But I don't know how to get rid of them all. So the bottom line is you have to live with it. And at my age, I could care less. But at your age, you do care. You know, I'm 65 years old. I put my time in. And frankly, I never really gave a damn about what other people thought of me as long as I thought I was doing a good job. People can think what they want. I had to go to bed with me every night. Nobody else did. I'm the guy that looked in the mirror the next morning to see whether I like what I look like. And I don't mean facially, I mean the person. So those are my standards. But today, a lot of young people are going to be shocked at things that they're going to see down the line as they decide to move forward. I think you need to be very careful about that. But it's a great book. Read that book, Starfish, because you'll understand the starfish better than I did.
I think you're talking about a more of a structured, corporate hierarchy versus, kind of a linear or, one without, strict focus or so forth. And, most companies are starting to basically have, less of a hierarchy and so forth, where people take on duties based upon their skill set or, what they actually prefer. If you look at a lot of the growing companies, and I hate to correct the congressman, but the eBay actually owns Craigslist. And so the reason they bought Craigslist actually is for a variety of reasons, for their traffic, basically, how they basically have user engagement and so forth. But in terms of revenue drivers, I personally don't think that the hierarchy of a business versus a free-form organization really has anything to do with the revenue drivers or its profitability or so forth. I think it's just a different way that people basically organize ideas, and especially as a company that's dictated by a lot younger ideas and so forth, I think it actually stems creativity a lot more because people don't feel like they're stepping on other people's toes, et cetera. So that's my 2 bits.
And if I could ask Hart a question, because my question kind of deals with what you just talked about. I was intrigued by your comment that you don't use titles in your organization.
Mm-hmm.
And as someone in the military, that's very foreign to us, especially the hierarchy chain of command that we use. So I'm just curious how you define leadership in your organization and the steps you take, I guess, to develop leaders within your organization.
Yeah, thanks. Innovation, creativity, input, work ethic, et cetera. So, I mean, we hire somebody and, maybe they're a graphic designer or maybe they're a biz dev, they're a salesperson or so forth, and their role is freeform. So whatever, they walk in the next day and say, hey, I think you guys should try this, or hey, here's a screenshot I put together, hey, here's a GUI, or hey, XYZ company just went on and launched an internal webmail, or, whatever it is, and their almost protocol or whatever their role in the company is almost designated by their input and how they basically be able to, what if they're putting time on their weekends and they're coming up with different ideas, they're going to advance through the company, and we also do things where compensation is based, down the road. So we do hidden bonuses. So instead of, everybody knows they have some type of base, but on a monthly or annual basis, they get a hidden bonus based upon, the role of the input or whatever additional creativity they kind of put in the company. So everybody kind of has a base job, which is probably about 50% of their job, and then everything else is kind of it's kind of added bonus. So it's kind of a combination of what GE and Google does.
But I think in the private equity area, in the areas that Hart's dealing with, that makes sense. But in your traditional standard kind of company that's on the New York Stock Exchange trying to make money, it wouldn't work very well. Like Hart just used his own words. When he has to go sell something, he doesn't send those innovative, creative, smart 24-year-olds because no one's going to listen to him. It's a bad idea. I'm sorry that they won't listen to him because I figure there's a lot of smart kids out there that can help sell things, but the gray hairs like me, we sit there and we look at it and say, okay, I know when I do pitches, if we don't have a gray hair in the room making a pitch, we have less of a chance of getting the job. It's unfortunate because the people I'm dealing with are much older. And so it depends on what sector you're in. The internet sector, the sector that he's dealing with, innovation, technology, it works. This idea of a decentralized management where you just go out there and innovate and create, it makes the juices flow. You just can't wait to get up tomorrow morning and do another great idea. It works. But in the more traditional, maybe that's what's wrong with the more traditional stuff. Maybe we have too much hierarchy. I mean, look what happened to General Motors and Ford and Chrysler with all their hierarchy. So maybe some of the starfish can help those guys out.
Let's have just one last question, and then we'll need to wind it up. Yes, go ahead. Middle there.
See, at my workshops, I used to go around the room. I didn't want the right side to get any more upset than the left side or the back and the left. It was a treat just to try to figure out who you want to ask questions. It's not easy.
Well, this question is in reference to something Mr. Cunningham said. I'd like to open it up to all the panelists. And so at the very beginning, you mentioned that one of the keys to establishing credibility as a young leader is to compensate for your lack of experience. Can you elaborate on some of the ways that you've done that or seen other folks do that in their own personal careers?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, I started in an apartment with a credit card and a $1,500 credit balance, right? So I didn't have any outside funding, I have anything. So the first thing I did is I called up Pepperdine University and asked for a couple interns, right? So they sent a couple interns down, and I didn't have to pay them, and you kind of build from there. So, so I had zero credibility, right? I was a 21-year-old MBA, but I had ideas, and I learned, and I read more. So if I can bring creativity and knowledge that nobody else has by doing more and more research, I can slowly be able to build that credibility until I work in my experience, right? So, I mean, you guys will have the best degree you could possibly buy, right? I mean, if I was going to hire somebody, Naval Academy versus someone at Harvard or Princeton, it's far exceeding, right? I mean, I know plenty of guys that graduate from Harvard, they can't lead a bunch of monkeys, right? But, I mean, that's all you guys do is lead, lead, lead. And you guys can be able to utilize that to move forward. However, when you guys basically get in the military, you guys get into the workforce or so forth, you're not going to have that experience. So what you need to be able to offset that by is by being able to do as much research, enough knowledge, and it's widespread knowledge. It's almost like you need to basically be able to have a biotech blog, an internet blog, a blog about healthcare, a blog about international affairs, and don't read books. Don't waste your time reading 400-page business books, right? No, seriously, right? What you need is you just need a blog in about 10 to 15 different subjects with an RSS feed, and every single night you spend 10 minutes. You learn everything there is about 15, 20 different industries, because you never know how those are going to apply to everything you do on a daily basis. So, I definitely think that anything of just knowledge, creativity, and also the fact that you grew up in technology. You're always doing multitasking. You're doing 75 different things on a daily basis, whereas kind of older generations are doing 1 to 2 to 3, right? That's just how their mind thinks. You need to take advantage of that. No, seriously, just how they're grown up, right? So you need to take advantage of that and get as much information and as many different topics as possible, because they'll apply to anything you do the rest of your life.
So one quick follow-up on that. Besides actually building your own knowledge base, a lot of things in business are based on perceptions. So how do you position yourself as a legitimate business person so that you're perceived by the gray hairs as someone who is having to do with the situation?
Well, the first part is never be ignorant, right? So when you have a staff or you have different people that you're communicating with, always be very, very open. Have you ever talked to somebody and right when you're talking to them, their just eyes roll up back? You instantly know they're not even going to listen to anything you said, right? They're just basically going to go into a different zone because they're almost, they have these different perceptions. They have these different ethos or biases that are just, offsetting anything you said, because for the last 50 years, they have this perception of a certain thing. Always be very, very open to ideas. I can't tell you how many different ideas I've had when I'm doing a wide variety of things, or I've listened to some of my staff members, right? I always try to learn as much as I can from every single person that I work with or work from, because every single person has something they're bringing to the table that you don't currently know. And so I think it's very important that you kind of show that to, people you work for or people you're working with.
On that energetic note, I'll do the one thing that I can manage to do at a time, which is pay some attention to the clock and recognize my colleagues are back there waiting to lead you over to noon formation and lunch. So I'd like to ask you, if you could, to join me in thanking our panelists for sharing their insights this morning.